Hello, and welcome to History Through a Headset, the first ever episode. My name is Delia. I am joined today by my co-host, Erin Kiley and Kara Mulligan. Hi, guys.
Hello, hi guys. What's up?
Guys.
What's up?
All right, first ever episode. Here we are. We're doing it. We did
Oh,
it.
yes.
So, today we are starting with GTA, aka Grand Theft Auto 5, a game developed by Rockstar Games. The game follows three main characters: Michael, described by Rockstar as a professional ex-con whose retirement is a lot less rosy than he hoped it would be; Trevor, a, quote, violent maniac driven by the chance of a cheap high and next biggest score, I can't talk, unquote; and Franklin, quote, a street hustler looking for real opportunities and serious money, unquote. Together, these three very different criminals work together to pull off some of the most difficult heists and missions in American history, at least according to them. The game is set in Los Santos, a city inspired by Los Angeles, in both successes and flaws, mostly flaws. GTA 5 brings to light some of the most important issues residing in America today, including, but not limited to, our research topics today, such as structural racism, social and economic classes, and some good old classic government corruption. So, those are our three topics for today. I covered systemic racism, Kara covered social economic classes, and Erin covered government corruption. So, I guess I'm starting. So, I covered systematic racism because one of the characters, Franklin, he's one of the main three. He is black, and he comes from the hood, essentially. And, I don't like calling it that, but that's what they all refer it to. It's essentially what it is. It's inspired by, that downtown kind of not great area of LA. Everyone's very low income. They're struggling for money. It's a lot of, just general financial struggle between these, people of color. And that's the thing about the neighborhood, is that it's all people of color. So one thing that I looked into was systemic racism and kind of how people of color ended up in neighborhoods like this. And I actually was not expecting to find an actual process in American history that caused it, but I did. So apparently, it was called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. It was used throughout the 20th century, basically as a form of segregation. It was like an unnamed form of segregation. They didn't want to call it that, but that's pretty much what it is. It came from FDR's New Deal, so it was kind of during the Great Depression, 1930s era. And one of the things that they did was they created a process called redlining, and it was used by banks to show which neighborhoods in America were the most worth investing into and the least investing into. And if you were in a desirable area, the bank would give you loans for your mortgage. And if you were in an undesirable area, they just wouldn't give you anything. You essentially just couldn't get a loan. So one part of that, and this is where the unnamed form of segregation comes in, is that they were only calling minority and neighborhoods of people of color undesirable, and it was purely a racist thing. And so if you look at a map, because they actually had a map of Los Angeles for this, and anything that was desirable was marked in green, and anything that was undesirable was marked in red, and then anything in between was either blue or yellow. And if you look at their map from 1939, I have the map. If you look at it from 1939 of LA, you can see the portion of Beverly Hills and Hollywood and all the rich, predominantly white areas were all green, and downtown LA, those areas that are even to this day still mostly minority neighborhoods, were all red. And so these minority people couldn't get loans for their housing, and that set this huge disadvantage for people of color even to this day, because now 74% of those communities that were marked hazardous or undesirable by the Homeowners Loan Corporation are either low to moderate income neighborhoods, or 64% of them are still minority neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods that were predominantly white and marked desirable are still predominantly white. There's still those white rich areas. There's not a lot of communication between them, and it's it's essentially just segregation in the modern day because it stems from this segregational process that like prevented people from getting loans. So,
Yeah, like basically what I looked at connects like pretty well to what everything you were just saying because yeah, like you said, we all know Los Angeles has a huge divide between those who are extremely wealthy and those who are very poor. And basically, a lot of the economic struggles that we see people going through in Los Angeles are of people who are either Hispanic or other people of color. Because in this article, I saw they basically went through and talked to people of different classes, such as, like, the upper class, middle class, lower class, super lower class. People are like extremely struggling, and asked them how satisfied they were with their quality of life and what they worried about, what they struggled with. And it said that 29% of residents worried about either like going hungry or not knowing where they were going to get their food. And this was mostly because like they couldn't even afford how much food costs. Um and 31% people even worried about losing their homes and becoming homeless. And this, you would think, like, oh, who's struggling? Like, what kinds of people are struggling this much? And they didn't mention white people at all. It's actually said that Latinos were 3 to 4 times more likely to fear hunger and homelessness than whites. And um Latinos were like stood out the most as having fundamental economic concerns among all the people in different classes, because most Latinos are in the lower class in Los Angeles, and half of residents with annual incomes under 30,000, and 1/3 of people earning between 30,000 and 60,000 feared having to skip meals due to their economic circumstances. So you wouldn't think like, oh yeah, living on 30,000 that should be enough to get food, but the cost of living in Los Angeles is so drastic that people main concern isn't even feeding themselves, it's trying to afford the place they're living, no matter if it's like a 1 bedroom apartment or a full house.
yeah, and I found a similar thing, especially with like because in big cities, especially not just Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Boston, doesn't matter. Like homelessness is a serious issue, and like
Yeah.
I found a similar thing regarding Black and Hispanic Americans is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that the highest unemployment rates of all the races are Black and Hispanic Americans because Black people are at an unemployment rate of 16.8% and Hispanic Americans are at 17.6%. So they're at this just like
Yeah.
crazy disadvantage. They also have a Black Americans have a median household income of 40,000 of around 40,000, while Hispanics have around 50,000, and the white average is 68. So,
Yeah.
especially in a big city like Los Angeles, where everything is expensive, they're struggling, and it's a lot of it is because of this
Yeah.
whole like loan issue. It's just this big like I'm just now realizing how similar our topics are. That like
Yeah.
because a lot of these class issues regarding minorities stemmed from processes like redlining, where it's just this early, or at least earlier, industrial just disadvantage that just affected them all the way to now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's even just like a visual difference between like the classes, like when looking at the city, even like in game or in real life. Like, you could tell when you've entered a place in the city that's not as high quality of life or as maybe funded or
Yeah, and even like in the game, because when you play as Trevor, he's in like this essentially countryside living space, like he lives that very like trailer
He's like
country
a redneck.
life. Exactly. He's like a redneck, and then Franklin, as I said this earlier, I don't like calling it the hood, but it's just how they refer to, and it's honestly the best I can describe it that people know what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
It's just that poor, low income minority neighborhood. And then there's Michael, who's essentially made of money. He lives in that rich, almost Beverly Hills type area. He's just living in that nice area of it's called Vinewood in the game, but it's Hollywood. Um, just the three differences economically between the three of them is just so
Mhm.
major.
So like Delia and Kara, like from what I got from you guys, you were kind of saying how like the economic like statuses of people like they're just getting like more and more divided. Like how like Franklin in like the quote unquote like slums, he's getting like those people are getting more and more poor, and then like the people like Devin Weston, for example, who's like the main antagonist of it, he's like worth like $15 billion. Like he's getting more and more rich, right? That's sort of how I interpreted what you guys were saying, which is like kind of realistic. It's how real life is, like the economic divide in America, right?
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, so the reason, like there are a bunch of reasons for that, as like Karen Delia mentioned, but one of them is like government corruption, which is what I studied. And so there are multiple characters in the game that you work with as Trevor, Michael, and Franklin that are guilty of corruption. The biggest one being Devin Weston, as I said, he is basically the physical embodiment of corruption. He's a horrible guy, and I'll get into that later. But you basically work with you as okay. So in the game, your whole like the reason you're going on these missions and the reason you're like collecting cars for like Devin Weston is all because of like blackmail, right? Because you're playing as these crooks, and if you don't do what this rich big guy tells you to do, then you're going to be arrested, and he could do whatever he wants with you. As Devin Weston quoted, I won't say the bad word, but he says, he like when they question him like why he's doing the things he does, he says why because they have things nobody else has because they can afford it. Because frankly, I'm rich enough to do whatever the hell I want, and you're poor enough not to ask me any goddamn stupid questions. Now I mean that as a friend. Namaste. So that sort of gives you an idea of the type of person Devin Weston is. He is using you as the player to collect cars, kill people, do all this stuff for him, and you can't say anything about it. So,
He doesn't even end up paying them. Like that's the whole
exactly,
point is that
like
they're doing this for money and they don't even get paid.
yeah, that's like exactly, and he can totally get away with it, and that's kind of realistic. Like they're the USA actually like I was researching it. USA in the decade is at the worst time for corruption. So we, like as a country, are experiencing more corruption than pretty much like ever before. So, for example, like the 2020 election, there was like this whole like this sum of money that was completely untraceable. It was flowing through systems, and no one could tell where like why. And that's the whole deal with corruption. Like money is basically being transported between parties, and you don't know for what reason. And especially with like COVID, there was like the Coronavirus Oversight and Recovery Ethics Act. It basically provided $1 billion to businesses and other companies so that they wouldn't have to lay off workers, to help people during the coronavirus. And it ended up being used for luxury like houses and cars, and no one could trace where that money went. So that's just one example of like corruption. And like today, um
Yeah, that even like kind of leads back. Sorry to interrupt, but like that kind
Very
of
good.
just because that leads kind of directly back into my whole thing of systemic racism and like racism within our government system is that,
Mhm.
a lot of black workers and, black employees in America struggled to afford health care because of, Erin, I don't know if you were here when I said this, but their median household income is around $40,000.
Mhm.
And most of that is just to upkeep their house, just to have a place over their head. So, a lot of them struggle to be able to afford health care.
Yeah.
And one part of that is that, because you were talking about coronavirus and, the money not being used for the right thing, is that, wait, I have the percentage somewhere, is that
Mhm.
black people make up, yeah, black people make up 17% of the American population based on the survey that I researched is from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And yet, 17% of the population is making up 23% of COVID deaths
Yeah.
because the money that was meant to go towards helping COVID went to luxuries and just things that the companies wanted for themselves. And it
Yeah,
affected
exactly.
it
And like,
affected these people that are affected by systemic racism.
yeah, like the lower class people have to face the end of it. They get the short end of the stick. The USA actually appropriated more money for COVID than like 150 countries combined, and you'd think that's a good thing, right? Because they're going to help the people. What turned out is that all this money that was supposed to go towards like smaller businesses to keep people's jobs and like tools for hospitals ended up being spent on like yachts and all of that crap. Like that's so these lower people in the like slums, have to suffer because of greed. Like that's basically why corruption exists, because of greed. And like that causes this further divide of like the classes, from the rich to the poor of the poor, and they can't even get basic human needs like healthcare. They're dying, while these rich people, they are stealing that money that should be used to save people's lives for like yachts and other crap like that.
It's almost like they're turning COVID into like a product.
Yeah,
It's like, oh,
exactly.
we have this thing that's going on, but we can make money from it. So if we, like I didn't research this, so like I don't actually know that much of what I'm talking about, but like, oh, like if we, move our money around this way because we have COVID, then we'll like make this much out of it. And it's like
Yeah.
you're literally turning a pandemic into a profit.
Yeah, that's exactly like what it is. And while the pandemic obviously isn't in GTA, we will get to that later though. We're gonna do an episode on pandemic game,
Stay tuned
but
for the pandemic special.
exactly, you could definitely tell how Devin Weston and Steve Haynes and all these other guys who you end up killing in the end, if you choose option C, which you should do in the game. Um,
For context,
they
option C is called Death Wish. It's the ending where everyone lives, all the protagonists.
Yeah, and yeah, so you basically cut all your loose ties with like Devin Weston. I'm saying Devin Weston so much. He's just like the main villain of the game, so you're gonna hear that a lot. But yeah, even like the start of the game is because of government corruption, because of blackmail, because in the prologue of the game where Brad, spoiler alert, or like Brad like dies and all that, the protagonist, I mean the prologue of the game, Michael, he lives in Los Santos because he made a deal with Dave Norton, who's Davey. He's like the nice guy, the nice FIB agent who is friends with Michael. He made a deal with Dave, so he would pay Dave, and in exchange, Dave would get him off the FIB or FBI. It's basically based off the FBI in real life. He would pay off all his like debts, and he would get to get a new name, new identity, start a new life in Los Santos. And yeah, so he basically like blackmailed Michael, and that's why he lives in Los Santos now. Not because like the weather or anything. So it's really interesting how even the start of the game, like the reason like the events are even taking place in Los Santos are because of these corrupt government officials. And of course, all of that leads into Delia and Kara's topics of like class divide and everything.
And that's like kind of a motif throughout the game, is the whole like Michael changing his name, because that's like Trevor seems pretty, I don't want to say anarchist or like anti-government, but he kind of is. He hates the
Yeah.
FIB agents. The only time he wants to work with them is when he gets to, do something to a hostage, because
Right.
Trevor's a violent maniac. But like he really does not like the FIB. He likes like his kind of trailer, like redneck life. And
Yeah.
so like that's kind of a thing that appears a lot throughout the game, is like, oh, you like Michael, you went to work for the government, being like the FIB's little like pet, and you got this nice new name and nice new house and like blah blah
Yeah.
blah, because it's like like Trevor, honestly, Trevor is one of the most like woke aware ones in the game, which you would not expect, because if you know anything about Trevor, he's literally insane. So, but he kind of has a lot of good points in like these weird little tangents he goes on, that he's fully aware that Michael is kind of in too deep. Like he is essentially a puppet to the FIB. It's like, I don't know whether or not he realizes it. He probably does, because towards the end he's like, "Oh, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore." But like, it's kind of weird thinking that Trevor, the insane one, who essentially chooses a low class lifestyle, is the one who's like, "Hey, like you're a government puppet."
Yeah, I even like think about that. Like Trevor, I love Trevor, and that's exactly why he probably chooses to like live like in like the redneck territory, is he doesn't want to get involved with like all that crap, even though he does later in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, but everything that Trevor does is for money, because he only gets involved in it because they want to go on like a heist.
yeah,
But
and Trevor knows how, like you said, Trevor knows how dangerous these people are. Devin Weston, he literally has, he has, okay, Meriwether is this like private security place, private security company that Devin Weston hires to kill Michael's family. I don't know if you guys remember that mission, but it's where you have to save, your family.
oh yeah.
Because yeah, those guys were sent by Devin Weston, and that just goes to show how powerful this man is. He has legal protection from Molly, that woman who got killed by like the jet turbine. She's like a lawyer for him. He has military protection. Meriwether, like I said, he's a billionaire, and he's affiliated with the FIB, so he can get out of virtually anything. Like he cannot get in trouble at all. He can make anybody do whatever he wants, and that's exactly why Trevor hates him. I mean, all of them hate him, but that's why Trevor's smart enough to realize that, like you said, Delia, Michael's in too deep and everything. But these people are scary. Like honestly, like
Yeah.
the government
And even,
people. This is why I love GTA 2, because it's so like it's so strange that while you are playing the murderers and the robbers, and you're doing all of this stuff, you're still the protagonists of the game. You're playing as the good guys, and there are antagonists in the game, and they're not you. And I think that's so interesting about GTA, that
yeah.
like
But like most
you're
of
not even the antagonist, even though you're doing all these like horrible things.
and that's the thing, is like, you're a criminal, but at the same time, and again, going back to Trevor being somehow the most woke one in the game, is that like, Trevor only targets Meriwether in a lot of his individual missions, where he goes like, on his own, or like with his individual like people that aren't Michael and Franklin. When he goes off and does like his own little mini heist missions, they're all against Meriwether. He knows that the rich are getting richer. He knows that this is a successful company carrying successful and valuable weapons, and it's mostly weapons, because they're a security company, and that's what he steals at one point. Is I think he literally steals like a nuke from this company and has to go return it. Michael makes him go return it. But, Trevor understands like the rich are getting richer, so I might as well take advantage of that and, attack Meriwether. They're a corrupt, rich company, so I'm going to go steal from them. They don't deserve it. So, and that's a lot of that's a lot of the part of, or that's a big part of government corruption. Is like these people don't deserve this money that they have because they're corrupt, they're manipulative, they use people. Like they don't deserve this. They don't do any of the work themselves.
Yeah. And like in the beginning of the game, you know what that reminds me of? Almost like Franklin in the beginning of the game where he's working for Simeon, like that foreign guy.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about Simeon.
Yeah, when he meets, or sorry, when he like tries to like steal cars for Simeon to sell, like that's his job, and that is essentially like a microcosm of the whole corruption with like Steve Haynes and Devin Weston. You remember like Franklin, when he's like hanging out with Lamar, who I love Lamar. He's like, yo, I want to move on to something big. Like all we're doing is stealing cars for this loser. And then he meets Michael, and then of course Michael's like in it deep, and then he's like, yeah, I want to move on to bigger things, and then he gets blackmailed by the government. So it's honestly kind of sad that he starts off like basically like blackmailed and working for this corrupt guy, making him steal cars. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna do something with my life, and then it's like, yeah, I'm gonna do the same thing, but with like government officials who will try to kill all my loved ones. So it's literally the same thing in the beginning of the game, and then it progressively gets higher and higher with like the people who are blackmailing you until you're in knee deep in like a bunch of crap. But I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, and that's the weird thing is like, because I researched my own topic, but I think your topic is so interesting because it's so present in GTA. Like this is really the main storyline of GTA is government corruption. It's the entire story of the game. So I think it's so interesting.
When Davey, there's a scene where Davey, he's like, okay, so all three of the gang members are there, you know, Trevor, Michael, Franklin, and he's like saying to them like, yeah, guys, I don't know if you know, but the government's pretty corrupt. And then there's like like completely silent. You see all three of them. I'm looking at a picture of it right now because it's such like an iconic scene where they're all just like blankly staring at him like, no duh, like because that's the whole point of the game, that the government is corrupt. And Davey's like, yeah, like by the way, like we're pretty corrupt, and they're just like, yeah, like, no yeah, shit, buddy.
Thanks.
It's so funny.
Yeah, no, like it's just interesting because like one thing about government corruption is that there's not really a solution to it, and the three main characters at the end of the game don't really have a solution to it. They literally just kill the antagonists because that's all they can do. You know, like if you're being blackmailed by a corrupt government agency, what else are you supposed to do? Not that I condone murder, because that sounds like I do. Not that I condone murder. Murder is bad. But like this is the whole issue with government corruption is like, how else do you stop it? Like what are they supposed to do? It's like there's really no solution to this.
Right.
You know.
And to your Kara, if you want to get in on this too, me and Kara, we took our civics class. When I was researching this, I kept thinking of Amy Radovic because we were learning about democracy and how not all democracies, such as America, are democratic, which, as stupid as that sounds, it is true, because there are cases such as, like, there is this one iconic case called McNally versus the United States, where the Supreme Court literally said that, like, the deprivation of services is not fraud. So, like, if I were to say, like, hey, Delia, give me $10 and I'll give you a rock, and I don't give you a rock, and then I don't get in trouble. That's basically like what that case ruled, the Supreme Court ruled. And since then, it's been this like history of going downhill. That's why I said earlier, I don't know if it picked up, but the U.S. is at like an all-time low all-time high in terms of corruption. And yeah, Kara, that reminded me of our civics class, because we learned about all of these countries, that how they claim to be democratic, but they have no transparency. They have corruption. They're threatening people. They're blackmailing. They're doing all these horrible things, and yet they claim to be a democracy. So I don't know. Like America, for example.
Yeah, that's true though, because like we always hear, "Oh, America has the best government. We're so fair," but deep down under like everything, what is occurring in the game can definitely be happening in our real world.
Yeah, like you can pass laws, you can do all you want, but people are gonna find loopholes, and they are like, it's gonna make, like I said before, make the richer rich, make the poorer poor. And you see Franklin, all these people in like the poor areas, people of color, like Delia said, and like Kara said, how like the economic divide, like it's people up there, like make passing laws, they don't know what really goes on, or they do and they choose to ignore it. Like GTA, as stupid as it seems, because it's a game about like stealing cars and like killing prostitutes and all that stuff. It's really like representative of America, which sounds like I mean, it really is. I'm
Yeah,
not even
but
gonna
like
lie.
it's true though. Like it's literally just this dramatized version. Like like I know Kara, you don't know like a whole ton about the game, like the story
Yeah,
itself, but like you play online and stuff, so you know like what the world looks like, you know some of the stuff you can
yeah,
do
that's what I
as
was
the
gonna talk
player.
about.
Yeah, like, it's absurd. The game is absurd, but a lot of the story covers a lot of these like real issues, even some stuff that we didn't cover. Like there are some topics that we didn't cover that we can cover in our finale episode, when we revisit old topics, such as like how women are treated in society and media and reality TV, because that's a big part of Los Santos as well. It's like the game is absurd because all of that stuff is totally dramatized and stupid, but a lot of it is real. Like this game is really real, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's like kind of what I was thinking. Cause yeah, sorry I haven't been talking a lot. I haven't actually played the game. I've played the online version, which has the same world as the story, but what I was gonna say, like just going around in the actual world and seeing everything, it feels a lot like real life. You see the poor, you see the rich, you see the bougie lifestyle, you see the drug-ridden lifestyle. You see it all, even just by like, for example, just driving around in game in a car. Like you can go to any sort of possible social class in the game, and it feels a lot like real life, even though it is like maybe in the story dramatized. And but you do see it all. Like you see prostitutes, you see drugs, you see alcohol, you see money, you see like violence, like, but all of that is very real in like in Los Angeles. Because when I was like looking into it, like I said, there was like a map that I saw that shows like where each social class resides, and obviously like most bougie people are located in right in Hollywood, in the Hollywood Hills, and those who are like, you know, struggle a little more reside at, southeast side. Like you hear about that. So just overall, like you see in a place like Los Angeles, the wealthy neighborhoods are just doing far, far, far better than those who are poor. And obviously it's like that in a lot of places, but it's just a huge gap in a place like Los Angeles.
hmm and that's like a super interesting thing. Excuse me. That's like kind of an interesting thing about the game itself is that like because I'm thinking about Franklin's character, because when I was researching systemic racism, like I was really focused on Franklin because it doesn't so much affect, well, it affects Trevor and Michael through like the whole through white privilege and stuff, but it really puts Franklin at the disadvantage. So Franklin was really the one I was thinking about. But then I was thinking about everyone else around Franklin, like Lamar, his aunt. Oh, Erin, what's her girlfriend's name? Tanisha?
Tanisha, yeah.
Yeah, like there's all, and there's Tanya, I believe her name is as well, like one of Franklin's school friends. There's Stretch, like there's all these people around Franklin that like, because social and economic classes almost kind of become their own culture in a weird way, and like Franklin himself is the one who like kind of wants to get out of it. He's offered a house by one of the characters up in like a nicer, richer area, and he takes it, and all his friends who are still living in essentially the slums of Los Santos are like, hey, like, good for you for getting this house, but like you're still hood. Like never forget that. Like you're still one of us. And it's kind of interesting thinking like Franklin's a special case because he didn't really have to excuse me, he didn't really have to do anything to get that nice house in the nice area. It was just kind of given to him. But, you know, these like just the culture that surrounds the neighborhood where he grew up, in the sense of like, you may be in this nice new area now, but you are still one of us because you grew up like quote unquote hood. Like you grew up as one of us, you went to the same, crappy school as us, you grew up around the same, drug dealers, the same crappy people, and the same crappy houses, like, you were raised like this. So it's kind of interesting seeing how, like, even though we live in an open class system in America where you can move in between classes, it's kind of interesting seeing how, like, it still kind of defines, like, your culture and the people that you're surrounded by, and, like, essentially who you are as a person, that like you were kind of raised in this neighborhood, so it is who you are no matter where you end up.
Right, yeah. I didn't even like think about that's such a good point that like economic classes can like form their own culture. Like I didn't even think to put two and two together, but it almost reminds me, I know people who are from Fairfield aren't really gonna know, but Fairfield is one of the most like economic diverse like places like in the country. Like it literally is. You can go 5 minutes away, you'll be at like mansions. Like 5 minutes the other way, and you'll be at like the complete opposite. Like quote unquote the hood. Like it's absolutely crazy, and especially like how GTA is like a smaller map because obviously it can't be like realistic. You have to like it would take too long to drive, but it's literally like like our town basically like. 10 minutes up the road. Yeah, like 10 minutes up the road, you'll be at a complete opposite place than where you were before. And how, like, that economic divide is getting, like, more and more greater because of all the reasons we stated before. But,
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking, like, I think a big problem, too, is, like you said, these different classes form their own culture. It's almost like because your social class is your culture, you kind of get trapped there, and you can't exactly like get out or make it to like the like that's not what I'm trying to say. Like you can't break out and be more wealthy. It almost seems like you have to stay there, or you should stay there because that's where your family is, and it's like you don't want to leave everything you've always known, your life, even if you want like a better life. Like we always talk about the American dream. Obviously during high school we've learned that the American dream's like a myth when it comes to like I'm gonna bring up the Great Gatsby. Like you just learn you learn that, the American dream isn't what it's always like made out to be. And obviously I haven't played the game, and you're talking about how Franklin lives in this hood and he's surrounded by all his friends, all his family, the people he's always known, and they're like, from what I got from what you guys said, like you'll always be a member like of the hood. You won't be able to break out even if you want to. And it's like they may like people get trapped. It just becomes this problem where it's like generation after generation you're stuck in the same social class. So from the moment you're born, you're basically told, yeah, this is going to be your life when you grow up.
Yeah, and it's because I mentioned during my point before that we have an open class system in America. We should technically be able to move in between, socioeconomic classes. We have that freedom. People can fall from the top to the bottom, and people technically should be able to climb from bottom to top. And some people do it, but it's very difficult, and generally a lot of the time it doesn't really happen, especially in like people who are middle class. Like people who are in middle class a lot of times stay middle class their entire lives. Like people from the very bottom can sometimes climb up to middle. But once you're in middle, you struggle a lot to get to upper. Like it's just a thing that happens. And like it's just interesting to think like because this is, I think the point I was trying to get at before with whole like the people surrounding Franklin and his life. You know, it's not that they're not happy for him, you know, because I feel like a lot of the times people who are down in lower class and struggling will tell the people around them, and you know, like go to school, get rich, make money, live in a better house, and like they want them for themselves as well. And it's like, I don't think they're mad that Franklin is now doing better for himself. I think it's more the idea of like, you know, just because you now live in this nice house and are now making money doesn't make you any better than us. And I think that's the big rivalry between socioeconomic classes, is that the people up on top think that, you know, they have this mindset that they are better than people down on the bottom. And it's like, yeah, they may be better off financially, but are they really better people? You know, if you look at people like Jeff Bezos, who, for people listening, I hate him. You know, like if you look at people like Jeff Bezos, who all he does is use his workers for his own benefit, is he really much better than people down in lower class? Because I don't think so. He just, you know, I don't know much about Jeff Bezos' mindset of people in the lower class, but I assume he thinks he's better because he uses them all the time. So it's like, you know, just because you're now in this nice upper class mansion doesn't make you any better than us. You're still you're still from the hood. You're not any better from us. You came from where we are now.
Yeah.
Like Lamar is really quick to tell Franklin that, like, you know, Lamar is so funny. I love it. But
yeah, Lamar's great.
Franklin's best friend, for anyone wondering. Yeah, he's quick to, like you said, to like, oh yeah, you're still hood, like you're still one of us, like, you know, your bougie ass house, like, you know, whatever. But,
yeah, and even like, cause Lamar has that one scene where he's yelling at Franklin about Tanisha, because for anyone who doesn't know who Tanisha is, she was originally Franklin's girlfriend, and then they broke up, and then she ends up, you know, getting in a couple different relationships. She's with like a lawyer at one point. She's with a brain surgeon at one point. I can't remember who she's with at the time that the game takes place, but she's, you know, she's going around getting with like very wealthy men, even though she comes from that lower class neighborhood. So it's kind of interesting seeing a conversation that Tanisha and Franklin have towards the end of the game, because they are like, you know, she still wants him to go help their friends who are still down in lower class. She comes to him asking for help. You know,
Right.
she is now getting with very wealthy men, so she herself isn't financially struggling anymore. Franklin's living in the nice neighborhood and making money through his criminal activity, so he's not struggling financially anymore. You know, neither of them are lower class, but it's interesting seeing them have that conversation where Tanisha's asking him to help their old friends, because it's interesting to see how Franklin kind of has moved on from the hood. It doesn't really care about it anymore, but Tanisha, who's in the same financial situation as him, still cares, you know, because she is very much ingrained in that culture of like, these are my friends, these are the people who I grew up with, I am from the hood, I am from this struggling lower class neighborhood, this is who I am. So even though I'm not that anymore, I still need to, like, I need to go help my friends. I want Franklin to go help his friends, you know?
yeah. Delia, icon Poopy Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is Poopy Brown. All right, so I think that's gonna do it for this episode, unless anyone else has any last minute points that they didn't get to share in their research. But
I think I'm good.
I'm trying to look through mine. I don't know. I had a couple more fun fact type things. I mentioned, you know, for systemic racism, Bureau of Labor Statistics found that pregnancy-related deaths are a 13 to 41 ratio white women to black women.
Ooh.
There's a fun fact. So for every 13 pregnancy-related deaths for white women, there's 41 for black women.
Yeah.
There's a little thing I found, but I don't know. Just also the term systemic racism, little fun fact, was founded in the 60s and refined in the 80s. So it was during the civil rights movement. Little civil rights history there, but other than that,
I have a little fun fact. Something I just remembered, actually. GTA was not GTA 5, but like the original series was originally it was originally called Race and Chase. So like I just thought that as we were talking about like having these like deep discussions, I thought it was so funny that it was originally like a car game, like literally like racing, and now it's all about like all these like crazy big ideas about like the economy and like the government and racism and social classes and everything
Yeah,
from like
just
a
all these
car
like real
game.
issues.
Like that's so funny to me.
Yeah, but I feel like it's a good thing. Like these are issues that because these are issues that aren't really brought up much in video games.
Yeah,
You know, so it's good that like
especially not
it's
in,
being
like
discussed.
modern, like not for today.
Yeah.
Like you know, there are games like Red Dead Redemption, we'll talk about later, but like all those stuff, but not for like
Yeah.
facing the issues that we have today, unlike GTA, like which does
Like a lot of them are, and that's why we have this podcast, is to talk about the real issues of like historical based video games. But GTA is not history based. It takes it was developed in 2015 and it takes place in 2015. Like this, like it is our modern world. Like
Yeah.
video games don't really cover that. So I feel like GTA, like it's interesting to see how like it developed from just like a car game, but like it really is talking about some super important stuff. So I don't know. I think it's a really
Yeah.
important game for how absurd it is.
I think from like the surface too, like people always get this idea about like GTA that's like, oh yeah, it's like highly sexual, which it is. It's highly violent, which it is. But deep down, under all of that, there's definitely like a lot of important like ideas that are trying to be shown about just our society, and this stuff is real, so they have to show it. And even if it's like dramatic, like it really opens like up our eyes. Like as we said, we spent a whole episode talking about like all the problems that GTA showcases in like our world. Like
especially in like a place like Los Angeles or Los Santos in this case, like
Yeah.
where so many things are like Fairfield, where you have like the highs, all the highs and all the lows of like not just economic, but like people and like housing and everything. I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think that'll be it for this episode of History Through a Headset. Thank you so much for listening. We got through our first episode. Yay.
Augers.
Yeah, tune in tomorrow. Tomorrow is Red Dead Redemption, which Erin just mentioned.
Ooh,
So
exciting.
Erin's
Catch you on
very
the flip
excited for this
side.
one. So catch you on the flip side. We're going to be talking about the Wild West tomorrow.
I'm excited
So-
for that.
So thank you all for listening. This has been History Through a Headset. My name's Delia. This has been Kara and Erin. See y'all tomorrow.